Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the very last episode 7 of the CLI automation mini series within our digital literacy series. And it's really been a fantastic series, and we've really enjoyed having you attend them. If you haven't seen all of them, please do go back and revisit them, because you'll find lots of really good stuff there to chat about. We're focusing today on really kind of the bigger issues, looking at the lessons learned, but also looking a little bit forward about where all of this legal automation stuff is going. And of course, you are well acquainted with the people in front of me, but let me reintroduce them to you. Sam Flynn from Joseph. Hi, Sam. Giles Thompson from Avoca. Hi, Giles. And Jean Turner from Lawhawk. Hi, Jean. Mark Tyndall from Neodologic. Hello. And Evan Wong from Checkbox. Hi. So they're all going to jump in here and we're going to have a bit of a chat, but feel free, of course, at any time to put your own questions in the Q&A section just right towards the end there, because we'll be sure to jump in and get those working for you as well. I wanted to kick off the session today first by thanking all the folks that you see in front of you and their organisations. We started this journey really by bringing everyone together and really just talking about what legal automation was all about, and trying to provide a resource for people to be able to dive into that and the various parts of it, so they'd have discrete sections but also the whole. We described it as the A to Z of legal automation. I think we got there. Do you think we got there, panelists? Yes, we got there. Yeah, we've got much shaking of heads. Okay, very good, excellent. So there's a lot of stuff for you to be able to go back to, and I'm sure you'll hear mention of perhaps some of those episodes as we respond or have responses to questions today that you will be able to go back to and listen to. So welcome, and really great to see you all here today. Because we're focusing on those bigger questions, I wanted to kick off, and I'm going to address this to all of you. And Mark, we're going to start with you on this question. But, you know, there are so many myths flying around legal automation. So I thought we'd do a bit of myth busting to start off with. So what's the most common automation myth that you think we should bust here today, Mark?
Thanks, Terri, and thanks to asking me to go first. It's really helpful. It's not so much a myth, but probably a misconception, and we come across it pretty regularly. But the myth is that no code means no work or very little work. And essentially, the notion that really well-designed applications, solutions, data-driven solutions, workflow solutions, or document automation solutions kind of appear or materialize without a whole lot of input. Really, the technology is just the beginning, or sometimes the end point, as we've talked about in this series. So well-designed solutions take time and effort, and that's actually where the real work begins.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, I've probably got to come to you next, right? What's your favourite myth? And maybe there's other bits, flavour to that myth that you want to bust as well.
Yeah. I think similar to Mark's. I think there's some common misconceptions around where the effort is required. So a really common one we get is people are quite hesitant about taking the first step. They think the first step is going to be really, really hard, or getting used to the technology, or figuring out what the pain points are that they want to solve, or coming up with ideas. I think often people are surprised that that's kind of the easier part. What's harder, or what people are surprised by, is that you can't just set and forget. You know, you don't just get to build the tool and then you go on your merry way. There's work to be done at the end, you know, connecting it up to different processes, spreading the word, getting people to use it, change management. And then obviously if we need to change it or maintain it going forward, it's this sort of living, breathing beast. So you can't just, set and forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, what are your thoughts about that? What myth would you like to bust to kick us off with?
So I'm glad that Mark went first, because I would have accidentally taken his one. I completely resonate with what Mark mentioned, but I'll pick another one. So I think the other myth that I would put forward specifically with legal automation is that legal automation is solely a legal solution. It's not. It's actually a business one. And often all of the innovations that get created off the back of that needs to interact with the business in some way or the other. So being able to bring in those stakeholders, build in the empathy for the design process and understand how to actually do the change management to make it successful is really important. So thinking outside of just legal as being the solution, but thinking about it as a business solution.
Yeah, fantastic. And Giles, over to you. Myth busting. Do it.
Yeah, I think the number one myth here that I'd like to bust is that it is helpful to try and automate everything. And when I'm talking about automating everything, I'm talking about everything in a particular process. So if we're talking about automating an SPA or a loan agreement, this is an actively unhelpful myth. And I think the myth comes from the fantastic training that lawyers have in order to make their product perfect and 100% finished, to avoid liability, but also to give that client the best possible experience when they look at that document, so they don't see something that in square brackets in the first line of the document. But actually, when you're talking about automation and you've automated something to the nth degree, you're harming yourself, because for every different scenario that you account for in your automation, you make it much less flexible, much less sort of able to be tweaked. And actually, you're doing that every time you add a new sort of potential variation in the automated sequence. You're actually, creating new possibilities at a multiple, which makes it much, much more difficult for you to then adapt that going forward. And we know life changes. Life's thrown a lot of changes at us recently, and actually, our automation should be prepped for that as well.
Absolutely. And Jean, you get to round out the myth busting. What myth do you wish to bust?
Thanks, Terri. I actually think that there's a myth that automation projects have to be very lengthy projects and expensive. And so it sounds like it's the opposite of what these guys have said. But I think it's actually, if you take the advice that even just in the last couple of minutes has been shared, but also the learning throughout this whole series, and you kind of put the work in up front and you get your foundations right, then they don't have to be actually that complicated or difficult at all. But it really comes down to kind of being organised and thinking things through before you do it. And then I think you can actually achieve a lot more than people expect, a lot more quickly and at lower cost.
Is it a case, Jean, of kind of, that it might feel that you're going slower at the beginning, but then it happens pretty quickly once you get all of those bits and pieces in the foundation?
Oh, I think certainly you speed things up. Once you've done the first thing, you kind of realise all the things that you didn't really know, and you can take that into your second project, and then the third, and that just really starts to build on top of itself. And so you end up doing things very quickly the more you get into it. But it can take a bit of time at the outset to get those foundations solid so that you can build on top of them. Yeah,
thank you for that. Evan, I want to pick up on something that you said about the connection to business, I guess, and automation. And, we've got this kind of fairly traditional view of how particularly a legal matter can be offered with this triangle of cost and speed and quality. And, if we're focusing on one, we may or may not be able to have it, and there might be another two in play, or whatever the case may be. How, if at all, has legal automation messed with that triangle?
Messed is probably I would use the word improve on that triangle. I feel like so the triangle is speed, cost, quality, right? And the idea is you can only really have two at a time. So if you have speed and quality, you'll be compromising cost, or if you have speed and cost, you'll be compromising quality. Look, I think automation sort of expanded the pie a little bit, because when you look at sort of the way that methodology is typically applied, there's certain constraints, and they're constraints that are applied to people often delivering the service or the product. What's interesting about legal automation is I don't tend to think of automation as being able to provide necessarily all three of those areas, but rather when you are constrained with only two, how does legal automation protect the third one as much as possible? So if I give you an example, right? So if we were to say we have a project that favors speed and cost, then traditionally we would think about compromise to quality, right? So you got speed, something gets done really fast, very cheaply, it must not be that good. But automation adds an extra sort of protection to the quality, because You can build best practices. You can build in compliance by design. So if we use a specific use case, let's say it's conducting a legal risk assessment, right, on a contract, or maybe it's on a privacy incident. By being able to use automation to build in the rules and the best practice processes, we can in fact get things done pretty quickly and cost efficiently, because now we have a system that's driving the quality and protecting the quality alongside those two qualities, right? And you can apply that right across that triangle. If you favor cost and quality, you can compromise on speed. But with automation, you can patch that up with things like self-service. Even just the efficiency of getting things done faster means that you can, not compromise speed as much as you would without automation. So I think the last point I'll make, though, is whilst that all sounds really great, back to, I think it was, Mark's point again, around his myth, is this competitive advantage doesn't come free, right? There is a cost of investment to legal automation, right? It's in the same way that you invest money, you lose money and time in the short term to then be able to sort of realize that in the mid to long term. And that's the same thing here. Legal automation will slow you down initially. It will take money, in the form of change management and service fees and license fees for technology. But the idea is that, like investing money, you will in fact get the benefits of that wheelhouse that I was talking about across the three elements of the triangle.
Yeah, absolutely. Giles, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, not to be dramatic, Terri, but I think it blows a hole in this model.
We like drama. Drama's good.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about introducing automation to this model, you're talking about essentially going from a model of professional services and your returns or utility being limited by the number of hours in the day that your skilled personnel have. When you introduce automation, you're talking about exponential gains, and you're talking about being able to leverage something at scale. In the same way as a technology business, or in our world at Avoca, SaaS. So for the amount of resource that you invest, because of the model of self-service, where you're not taking hours of the day to deliver your product necessarily, someone is coming on and benefiting from that. You can deliver effectively. The limit is the amount of time that people have to actually access the resource. So I think it completely shifts things. In addition, and I think it's also important to think about what we're talking about when we're talking about quality. Now, certainly a couple of years ago, I would have been thinking, well, what's the quality of the drafting in the legal document? How robust is it? How skilled is it? But actually, with the benefit of a bit more experience of speaking to the stakeholders that, Evan has rightly flagged are really, really important. Clearly, the quality of the service should actually, take into account things like 24/7 availability, the integration of the approvals process, the scope for error and for compliance, the streamlining of internal communications. So you start to also be thinking about sort of other types of quality, which are not necessarily, again, linked to time invested. But yeah, I think that's a great thing to discuss.
And both of you have set up a fabulous segue to the question that I want to ask of Mark and Sam. And it's a really big question. But I'm wondering whether legal businesses can actually survive today without automation. Is it even possible, or is it that, when you're setting up a business, it's got to be one of the things on the top of your list to think about? Mark, let me go to you first on that one.
Legal businesses can definitely survive without automation, most definitely, and many do. I worked with a partner at a law firm for many years, and he once said to me, Mark, everyone's been telling me that, for 15 years even, that this technology change in the market is going to crash on me like a big wave and wipe out my practice. It hasn't happened yet, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. And he was right. He was right in lots of ways, because where survival is the goal, and it's interesting that you use the word survive, Terri. humans are super capable, and I've seen incredible creativity in the aid of self-preservation, and that none of that means technology. And I think in law firms and maybe corporate legal teams and in government, that plays out at the level of strategy and culture and organizational psychology and interpersonal relationships and even really good storytelling. But it just means that legal capabilities can, often enough remain as they have been for the past 10 years, if that's what their leaders and business stakeholders and clients reward. And so survive without automation, sure. But if you move up that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs with a bit of a legal automation twist, somewhere between survival and self-actualization, there's client centricity. It's like, are you thrilling your client? Is the service you're providing one that your client wants and demands and has adapted to? And are you changing with your client? Because ultimately it might become a bit existential, and your practice or your team might be totally irrelevant, but it doesn't happen in such a binary way. So definitely legal businesses can survive without automation today.
Sam, I'm wondering whether, thanks for that, Mark, I'm wondering whether what it does do, though, is create kind of a leveler, because we see a lot of particularly solo and small practices now using or combining automation with obviously a whole bunch of other things, but it's really created the opportunity for them to enter the marketplace where they otherwise may not have and compete. So it's kind of flipping from the survival to the competition part of automation as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I agree with Mark when I was thinking about the question, like the word survival kind of jarred, not because it's the wrong question to ask, but because it kind of cast the exercise of automation in an interesting light, right? And the first thing that came to mind was, it's not about survival, it's about thriving. And that's really what I think most of the legal teams that we work with are focusing their minds on. It's not a question of, if we don't do this, we will, lose business, or we will, not pick up this particular legal issue, or we're going to spend too much money on this workflow, but rather, how do we become more efficient? How do we thrill our clients, as Mark said, or delight our clients? How do we increase our margins, make more money, become more profitable, etc.? So I think it's a lot of those sorts of considerations, rather than probably was an old-fashioned framing, right? Like, I feel like 5-10 years ago there was a lot of that kind of I don't know, like a doomsday kind of prophecies of, automate, innovate, or you'll perish. And I think ultimately that probably created a bit of a generation of cynics, where they've said, well, I'm still, making money. The partners of the law firms are still paying off their beach house and, going on holidays and all those kinds of things. So I think we do need to be a little bit more careful or nuanced in the way that we frame the exercise. But I think that's a really good point, Terri, for people who don't have big budgets or aren't from the big law firms or big in-house teams at corporates. Automation, particularly Nocode, is a really great leveler, and means that they can compete on the level of any sort of organization.
Yeah. Jean, I wanted to address this next question to you, and I know that it's something that you picked up and focused on in your episode, or one of your episodes, I should say, in this series, and that is thinking about automation in terms of the bigger picture. So we've been talking about it very specifically now and the role that it plays, but is it important to see it as not a silo, as one thing to look at, but rather part of a larger whole?
Definitely. I might actually just comment on the last question as well.
Please,
a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not so much existential sort of stuff, but I do wonder whether, there's a lot of talk about inflation, coming back, and people talking about the Great Resignation, and whether people are kind of shifting jobs or heading offshore, or there's obviously quite a lot of change that's coming. So I think firms probably will have some choices to make as to whether they, that they pay people more, or they replace people that leave with just another person, or they look at whether, maybe they should be looking at whether the automation can help them to, to do things in a different way. So it's not so much that it's existential again, but I think that, there will be more choices perhaps that people will want to consider and make as some of this unfolds over the next couple of years. So that'll be interesting to see that. On the other question, yeah, look, I think probably all of us here probably got into automation in some way through our experience as lawyers, and typically that's because you're thinking about the legal documents that you draft and how you could do that better. And certainly that was where I got into it. But you then sort of you start realizing that there are other documents that are also before and after the legal documents, and so it broadens your horizons. And then you start realizing that actually the whole process involves many other steps that have not necessarily anything to do with documents at all, and that's where data and signing and kind of approvals and all that sort of stuff comes in. So I think you just go on that journey and sort of broaden things out, and you realize that the time that you can save from preparing the documents might not actually be the main outcome in terms of what you can deliver. So one example of that, we've done a project earlier this year with a company called Armstrong Downs in the construction space, and when we first scoped that out, it was reasonably clear we thought that we could take sort of an hour or so out of the drafting and a couple of hours out of a meeting time. They do about 40 projects a year and 10 projects a year and 40 odd subcontracts. So it's like, oh, well, there's 1,200 hours of savings. So it stacked up, right? I mean, these things don't have to actually be huge projects and to be able to pay their own way pretty easily. But what we found was that actually the technology enabled the people to have a different sort of way of working together. So Armstrong Downs will create a subcontract using the tool. They'll send it to the subcontractor and say, hey, here's what we want to discuss with you when we meet. Subcontractors have sort of engaged with that and now realize that if they show up at that meeting and they're prepared, they can actually finalize the agreement and get it signed in the meeting, which means they walk out with a signed contract and they can get on with the project. And Armstrong Downs found that subcontractors were changing the way they engaged, and so they're now more prepared. So you've got two parties now that are meeting kind of better organized and prepared with what they want to discuss. They're not going through the whole document. They're reviewing the kind of the key things on screen and making any adjustments they need. And they're trusting the system will then generate an industry standard contract with the terms that they've agreed. So they don't have to read the whole thing. So they're actually signing it on their phones in the meeting room, and they're walking out the door with a signed contract. So this year, with all the stuff that's been going on in construction and all the capacity constraints and kind of raw materials and all the stuff going up, it's been hugely beneficial that somebody can leave a meeting and order their materials now, not sort of in maybe 4 to 10 weeks was sometimes how long it was taking to do. And kind of in the meantime, prices have gone up, or you might not even be able to get this stuff. So I guess what we're seeing is kind of, the bigger opportunity is actually kind of like the technology enabling people to join up the process and to think about how they kind of relate to each other and work together. And that's where the real big opportunities lie. And the other day, another person was talking about it taking an hour out of drafting a contract, but it's a 45-day process from beginning to end. So again, you kind of go, well, okay, let's not focus on the document, like what's causing this thing to take 45 days, because that's where we need to focus. And these guys would be probably similar in terms of the stuff they see quite regularly, that that you've just got to look at the whole process and outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Giles, I know you focused on this in our very first kind of kick-off session, that, when you were defining legal automation, I guess people often default to that being document automation. But what Jean's describing there, and what you described as well, that it's much, much bigger and broader than that. So what are your thoughts about, I guess, document automation, but all automation, and what gets encompassed or swept up in that definition?
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting one, and I think it's important to think of it not as a thing unto itself. It's not just this sort of benign thing that you can just add like a bit of salt or pepper to a recipe. It is something that has to sort of be fused and done, not in a silo. The first reason for that, and the reason I conceive of it that way, is you don't want to fall into sort of the WASP problem. If you start thinking of it as like its own thing, which you can kind of force on people in a top-down way, and actually that the automation project that you're doing, is going to be shaped, in a room by you and a few eggheads, and then it's going to work. Trying to put that on someone without them having had any sort of input on the shape of the project, you will just be viewed as a wasp. And actually, to be fair, you might end up, imparting a bit of a sting, because ultimately, your lack of sort of feedback ahead of time and shaping of the project for people's individual needs probably will cause some harm. I think the other thing I would mention here, which is pretty separate, but I think important as well, is, automation is a technology or a category of technology. It's a bit like blockchain, or distributed ledger technology, or artificial intelligence. It's a technology, and it's all about the application or the use case. And so, I guess it is a group of technologies, and actually, machine learning might sort of sit within that. But the fact is, and I think maybe my fellow panelists will be annoyed at me for saying this, I think they're more pragmatic than that, actually. But automation technologies, a lot of the law firm specific ones, they aren't that complicated. It's quite a simple thing that we're trying to do here. So I think it's much more important to focus on the assets we're trying to get more out of. So in the context of a private practice law firm, and it will be similar in-house, albeit slightly different, the main assets we have are our intellectual property in our legal contracts. Also our reputation with our clients, and also our people. So it's really important to think of automation and those technologies as being ways of getting the most out of that resource. So, for example, our legal documents, actually there are legal technologies in automation out there to help get the most out of those documents, because what we can have is we can have our fee earners or our lawyers in the context of in-house helping to shape the way that those documents are automated. So they're assets which we're breathing new life into periodically, and you can have people like Jean who are also sort of helping you with those tools, but also tools which are a little bit less accessible too. When it comes to sort of utilizing our lawyers in the best possible way, we need to think about what types of works the lawyers actually want to do, and actually where they can add value, and where automation can help a little bit and carry some of that weight as well. And similarly, we need to be thinking about what our clients, or in the context of in-house, our stakeholders want, what is going to bring them joy, to use the words of Marie Kondo. And we need to think about, which clients perhaps would benefit most from automation. We need to apply it in that place. And if we do all of that, we're likely to be a bit more successful. But again, it's not just sitting in that room. And I think this attitude of siloing automation has come from some of these more old school tools, where it is very, very hard for a lawyer to even sort of read and investigate the deliverable. And thankfully, we've got great consultants out there to help lawyers understand these processes, but also slightly more accessible software as well.
Thanks for that, Giles. Mark and Jean, I wanted to ask you this question, but I'm asking it in a way that's drawn on your entire history. So your time in law firms and in the roles that you play now. And that is to ask you this question: who should be responsible for automation? Who should lead that process? And I appreciate this is going to differ depending on the nature of the legal business, and also perhaps the size of law firm in particular. But who is that person? Like, what are the things that they need to know in order to be able to effectively get this off and rolling? And Mark, let me ask this question first of you.
Sure, thanks, Terri. I mean, the question who is or who should be responsible, it does go a bit back to Giles's presentation about the definition of legal automation, exactly what we're talking about. But it's just, except as, read Giles's presentation, which was great. Essentially, the person responsible for legal automation is the person responsible for the service to the client. So everyone, in some organizations, that means no one. And that's a very general answer. But I guess we can talk about, in the law firm world and the corporate world and in government as well, the practical matter of who tends to be on the hook for this. But I guess the key thing is it's whoever is responsible for a service to a client. And again, going back to what we talked about a bit with Sam, it's like, who are we delighting and how are we going to do that? Who's responsible for delighting the client? So, I mean, we can get into the detail. So as a practical matter in the corporate world, it often falls to legal operations or legal transformation leads in legal departments. In law firms, in larger law firms have often built a real legal operations capability, and that's got a whole range of capabilities, including automation specialists and consultants and things like that, who come together to advise, say, the whole firm. But just as strong, really significant alternative legal services arms of law firms who do those massive e-discovery, transaction support, due diligence, large-scale linear review, document review, litigation support exercise, they're massive consumers and users of technology, and they're leading the development of the most innovative products in law firms as a kind of practice group. And then you've got chief digital officers and IT teams. It does depend on the size of the firm. Sometimes in different firms, you'll find a partner who, whacks a license on the corporate credit card and gets started that way. And that grows into something bigger and more institutionalized too. But I guess the point I'd like to make is that leadership on this comes from unexpected places sometimes. And we say legal automation, coming back to kind of Giles's presentation, we say legal automation, but the person responsible and who drives the agenda is a procurement leader or a contract manager or a CIO or a CFO, because they see the value and they're the one that actually grab the reins and take charge and provide the leadership. So who's ready to lead? That's the question. What
absolutely.
do you think? What do you think, Gene?
Yeah, so I think we would typically want to see two different types of people. So I think that there's got to be somebody who's kind of actually make sure that the project gets done, that progresses. Invariably, you're going to come up against some form of obstacle. So I'm thinking somebody senior enough, whether it's a partner in a law firm or the general counsel or someone who, when the IT team refuses to look at the security assessment, or they're saying that it doesn't really matter what you say, you have to use Office 365. There's no way you're going to get a specialist tool. Someone who can actually say, no, look, we've got an important outcome we need to deliver. It's going to make a massive impact to our business. So I need this done, and they can overcome it. You can't get that from somebody at a lower level. They're just not going to be able to overcome those kind of those objections. So I think there needs to be somebody who's the sort of the sponsor or owner of the project that will be invested enough to say, I understand why it's important and why we're going to make sure this gets done. So without that, I think you often will end up sort of stalling and getting stuck. But that person won't be the person who's actually doing the work as well. So you've got to have somebody who's really passionate about getting this done, and they'll take all the leeway that they can be given that's been created for them, and they'll make sure that all that hard work, the gathering of feedback and sort of getting the team ready for it and getting making sure that it's working well, all that stuff. There's somebody who will do that, and that doesn't have to be a senior person at all. There's always somebody in the organisations where it's going best for us that will do that. In one firm just recently I've been dealing with, it's a legal executive, and she just has phenomenal pride in her work, and so she'll send me there's a letter that should be capitalised here, or it could be as small as that or something bigger, but she's always sort of looking for kind of how it can be improved. And so those type of people are just gold, because they will always kind of find ways to help keep improving it. Without them, pretty hard to keep it, as Sam was saying, it's the living solution that continues to meet needs as it evolves. So I think you need both those types of people.
Thanks for that, both of you. I want to come back and revisit the no-code automation option. We kind of started with a little bit of a discussion on that, and we're seeing a lot of it. I mean, we're seeing a lot in the media about no-code, more so than perhaps we've seen for a while. So, Evan, I wanted to address this question to you. Is the no-code automation option a game changer right now? And I'm thinking particularly, just drawing from that last question of who's involved with, who's leading, who's getting into automation in the various places that's popping up, and that it might not be a person, for example, who can code.
Absolutely. So is it a game changer? Absolutely. And it comes back to the point that was made in the previous question, which is, leadership for this comes in unexpected places. And I think more broader than that, it's the fact that we now commonly accept, I think, software is eating the world. That phrase is well sort of coined and we all accept it. But there's still such a big gap between sort of the demand for technology in organizations versus the ability to actually deliver it. And that really then translates to, you know, for legal teams, whether you're a law firm or an in-house team, it really translates to almost being handcuffed when it comes to innovation and digitalization to the IT team, being able to prioritize your requests, to prioritize your needs. And anyone who's tried to sort of work with legal teams with digitalization in the traditional sense will know that IT tends to have legal quite far down the prioritization list. And so, you know, we often even talk about legal being a laggard when it comes to innovation, that we're very, you know, tech adverse. And I actually attribute a big part of that to the fact that as an industry, we are so specialized in the law and in sort of applying it, that our skill set in sort of being able to digitalize hasn't really been enabled. And that's what's really causing us to fall behind. But no code as a movement now is really unlocking the ability for legal as an industry to innovate. And it's really incredible. Some of the customers that we've seen, you know, use no code as being literally the pioneers of no code technology in their organization. And before you know it, the human resource team says, hold on a second, how are you producing this tech so quickly? And how are you doing this? And then you see procurement teams coming on board and operations teams coming on board. And all of a sudden you have legal as a function leading the innovation movement of no code in an organization. So I don't think the concept of lawyers are technology adverse, risk adverse when it comes to tech is entirely true. I think we haven't yet had the enablement tool to really allow them to do so. And no code is really that tool that's come along. And because of that reason, it's had quite a strong uptake because it is really about empowering the people who understand the processes and have the knowledge to be able to create these solutions very quickly without that chasm that often drops when you have to try and explain legal and process requirements to someone in IT who has no concept of how legal services are delivered and how clients like to receive it. And the very last point I'll make is around the speed and agility into market as well. Like it's one thing to have enablement, but it's a totally other thing, you know, to have control over timelines, over costs, being able to react quickly to things like the pandemic, right? The lockdown that has happened over the past whatever months. You know, teams that had no code were able to very quickly pivot and create solutions for their business around work from home policies, around force majeure sort of contracting rules and things like that. And so, yeah, you've got the enablement piece, you've got the sort of speed to market piece, and it's all coming together to really, I think, drive innovation in legal as an industry tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, just building on that, I wanted to ask you this question as well. And that is all of this now meaning that we're starting to think differently? And I'll throw out a bit of a progression, at least to my mind. You know, we used to have clients ask us the same questions over and over again, and we captured it somewhere, maybe in handwriting. Then it became frequently asked questions that were a PDF. Now is it a chat bot or something of that nature? Because although what we're trying to do, the function that we're trying to perform is perhaps at its core similar, the delivery of it and thinking about how to deliver it is really quite different. So has no code really enabled even more, to go to Evan's point, the ability to start thinking and creating quite differently?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really beautiful way of putting it. The way I like to think about no code is that it expands the universe of builders and use cases or applications. And Evan was speaking about that. Giles, I think you also touched on that earlier. You know, it's about opening up this technology and these tools, and Terri, as you put it, ultimately these possibilities, right, to a broader audience. And by doing that, I think everyone on this call has called out that ideas and owners and builders and creators come from all sorts of different places in legal teams, from the partner who buys the random license to the GC to the paralegal, is really across the spectrum. And we've seen really powerful use cases coming from all corners as well. One of the, Gary Adler, the Chief Digital Officer at Minter Ellison, spoke in episode 3 of this series to Tom, the CEO of Joseph. And I thought he put it really nicely as well. He called it bridging the gap between the people and the technology. And Evan, I think that's what you were talking about, right? Putting these tools in the hands of the people who live these experiences every day, understand intimately the pain points and the problems and the possibilities, can be really powerful. That said, going to Jean, I promise I didn't mean to call it to comment on all of you, but you've all made such good points. Going to Jean's point, I think always making sure you have a balance of skills and sort of responsibilities and power bases as well, I think is really important. So getting a good team together. I always love seeing like a partnership of a senior person and a junior person to do some of that heavy lifting, and the senior person to have the vision and the weight behind them to push something through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The only other point I will make, I think Evan's point about IT is something that will resonate with every legal team in a company and every GC. So getting the time and resources from IT is something you don't need to do as much of now with Nocode. It's a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible. I think the other piece as well is handing over control to the lawyers. So one of the problems with having to wait for IT and having to wait for resources is you don't have the ability to change it and update it over time, coming back to that maintenance point. And I think Nocode is a really powerful way of handing over control to these tools.
It's kind of like the part that really appeals to me out of all of this, but it is common to all of it, is just the excitement that it can create around experimentation. You know, just giving something a go and seeing how it comes out. I mean, to me is great as well. But I don't want to leave the no-code discussion without asking you, Mark, if there are any thoughts that you'd like to throw into on this point as well.
I'd love to. And I really liked what you just mentioned, saying that essentially that the excitement or the creativity that no-code might trigger or create itself. And what I've been wondering, particularly recently, is the flip of that, which is I actually think no-code automation is skating to where the puck was going to be, skating to where the puck will be. And where that is actually this confluence of lawyers and legal teams and professional services firms changing really quickly in their service orientation. So no-code creates the excitement and that engagement, that opportunity for that type of creativity and thinking. But that's also evolving itself within these businesses and within these teams. And I think there's a nice confluence of that going on at this time. So no code's necessary. It has to be there to facilitate that creativity and these new solutions, but it's not itself, sufficient on its own if we want to talk causation. And I think that service orientation that's been building momentum for many years now is kind of not necessarily peaking, but hitting at the same time that the no-code movement's really taking off as well. So it's both sides. I think we're riding a wave that is independent of no-code, but together it's a hugely powerful force.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think genuinely exciting to see where it will go. Folks, I'm going to start to wrap up now reluctantly, and just remind folks if they do have questions to please throw those into the Q&A as well. But I want to look ahead now. We've been talking a lot about, where we've been going with legal automation, where we are. But I want to kind of look ahead. We've started down this road a little bit of where it might go. What's the next big thing? Or if we're sitting in a law firm or in-house or in the legal ecosystem generally now, what should we be thinking about in terms of automation? Where should our brain be going? And Jean, I know that's a really big question, but I wanted to address it first to you, if I may.
Thank you. So what what we're seeing is this kind of huge convergence, I think, that's happening. So, we talked before about sort of people involved in automation have moved from documents and legal to thinking about broader business processes. I think the platforms of the type that you've seen as part of the series have all been on journeys to sort of to go from perhaps more narrower point solutions to being able to be used on those broader business platforms. You've got business automation technology, which is kind of also evolving and kind of heading back towards being able to be used for legal. And all of these platforms are all building out integrations so they can work more nicely together with each other. And as well as all the technology aspects, we see there's this network of people that are all kind of realizing how they can also fit together and work together. So I think what we now see is when we look at a situation, it's probably a bigger process and it's got lots of different stakeholders and lots of different challenges, and you're probably sort of looking to design, I think that we could solve this with this combination of these softwares and these parties coming together and designing something that will really solve that particular problem. And there's every business, they all have to be different in some respects. That's how they make their money. So the ability to be able to kind of see how you can put different components together and come up with a solution that's going to work really well for an organization, I think is really powerful. And for lawyers, I think there's opportunities for them to then play a real key role in that. So we're seeing heaps, and I know these guys were the same in the kind of the regulation space, particularly in the financial services sector. There's just ridiculous amounts of legislation and regulation coming. And it's almost impossible to see how you can manage that with kind of just chucking more people at it. But, lawyers probably in the past have put together massive spreadsheets summarizing regulations and kind of hand that over, and then somebody else would have to interpret that and then form a view as to what the policy of the organization will be, and then somehow or other try and turn that into a system. I think you can sort of see now how like the law firm can actually take that kind of knowledge and see how it can actually be built into the business process, so that when somebody's making a new loan, they're actually only able to do that in a way that's compliant with the new regulations. And it's easier for everybody to be able to sort of update it and sort of be able to see, the number of people that have gone through the process and that they almost been compliant, or even if Mark and I spent ages on this actually in the earlier webinar, so I won't go through that. But anyway, suffice to say that I think that massive convergence is starting to happen, and it's really exciting.
Gene spoke a little bit about Regtech. He was just kind of on the fringes of it, Evan. So I've got to come to you next about this. What are your thoughts, not just on Regtech, but what are your thoughts generally about where it's all going?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Jane. I mean, as a legal automation provider, we're often now coming up against systems that are not, labeled as legal tech. And I forgot who mentioned it now, but someone mentioned, I think it was Jane as well, mentioning Office 365 earlier on as being one of those systems as well. And it's just, it is where the industry is moving. And I think all of us will have an interesting time, I think, deciding to go narrow or broad. I think everyone's thinking about that at the moment. I reckon more broadly in terms of the next big thing for legal automation, Nocode we've already called out, so I'll put that aside. But I don't think it's actually in sort of, it's not about what is the next new tech in legal automation. It's not an evolution of the technology. I think it's actually going to be the evolution of how the existing tech is used and managed. And I'm talking specifically about sort of the governance and the operating model that needs to be set in place for organizations and law firms to be successful in actually leveraging legal automation, right? So, in the way that we sort of talked about purchasing a license on your credit card versus going through, say, a more formal CFO approved, budget process. There's so many different ways that you can end up through the gateway into legal automation. But I think in order for it to scale and be sustainable and to be robust in terms of delivering not just legal automation, but general business automation that Jane was alluding to, we do need to start looking at what are the governance, the operating models, the community, the interoperability with other existing legal tech stacks and non-legal tech stacks, and how do we actually work with IT? Because I think a very big friction point with Nocode is, you're going to get that knee-jerk reaction in the same way that automation scared lawyers many years ago. You get the same with Nocode and some IT teams, thinking, well, how is it possible that lawyers are going to be building software applications when we've literally been trained to do that? And even if there is no code, how do we trust the business to be able to put in the right controls in place, like versioning and testing and all those kind of things? So I think there's a big challenge ahead, but the next big thing for legal automation, I do think, is really about setting up that culture, that infrastructure, that process design mindset in working with the enterprise. And I guess the good news is there's people like Jane from Lawhawk, many consultants around that can help with that alongside the technology layer. Even the people in this room, as vendors, we spend so much time implementing these projects, seeing all sorts of flavors of different projects that there's a wealth of knowledge if you just know where to look.
Is there a factor in that, Evan, and thank you for that, is there a factor in that at its core around agility in a very broad context? So I'm not thinking of the narrow context that we sometimes put on that, but the structures and the governance that you spoke about, having the sort of flexibility almost to be able to be agile in the sort of marketplace you were describing.
Absolutely. What's really funny? So a few weeks ago, I was speaking with a customer, and they were literally designing in their heads what this sort of operating governance model would be for a no-code platform. And they were very smart to be conscious of not creating so much red tape and so much governance around a no-code tool that it takes 1 week to build the tool and then 3 months to approve it.
Yeah.
Because that defeats the whole point of that agility. So you're absolutely right. I think we need to strike an interesting balance. We need to find models that give the comfort and protection that more traditional methods of software development provide, while still maintaining this spirit of sort of the agility that no code promises.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Sam, I want to come to you next for your thoughts about this. Where do you think it's all going?
I want my answer to be no code. But I genuinely mean that. I just think, I know everyone on this call has sort of heard it and it's like done to death, but I spoke to speaking to Steph Corey, who was one of the founders of Clock the other day, and she just said, like, every second call I get is about this, is about no code, is about workflow automation. Like, it is running hot, particularly in the in-house corporate counsel space. But I'll put that to the side like Evan did. The other one I was thinking about when I was thinking about this question earlier was implementation as well. It's really not about the tech anymore in this space. Like, obviously we're going to keep building wonderful tech and making it easy to use and beautiful and things like that, but that's not really where a lot of the upside is now. It's in the implementation piece. So part of that is around the structures and processes and governance systems that we put around the tech. As Evan suggested, that's a really interesting challenge. I think one of the other big ones will be, in particular in the law firm space, is how law firms can really meaningfully integrate automation into the business of law. I think that'll be a really interesting space in the next few years. There's some firms doing some really interesting work in this space. I think there's a lot of other firms thinking about it and grappling with it and testing different methodologies and different applications. But that's one I'm watching.
I guess what's going hand in hand with all of that as well is the rise of self-help generally. Right? No matter where that's located, you can put the appropriate language and spin on it, whether it's in-house or it's business to business or consumer to business or business to consumer, whichever way you want to look at it. But I mean, that's kind of the flip side of that, outside the business in a way for clients as well, isn't it? So it's going to be really interesting to see how that space expands. Mark, I wanted to grab your thoughts on this, and I'm coming to you, Giles. Don't worry, you're gonna close us out. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on all this? Where are we going with all of this?
Data, and more data. And I wouldn't have thought that I'd disagree like with something so specific on the call, but I actually think when it comes to no-code technology, this is where the technology's got a long way to run, and we'll be developing this, like going hard on this for many years. One of the first questions that legal teams, taking that kind of enterprise level approach, the first question you often get is, all right, where is the data? What is the data structure? How do I create a new database? How am I pushing data into it? What can that do? Can I easily update that data structure myself? And what they're essentially saying is, how do I answer the burning business questions, not just by way of, these automation solutions operating, but by all the data I collect and putting it in a repository somewhere that I can control myself. And that means the ability, like using no-code tools in particular, to create and update and amend and push data around and data structures. So that's super critical, and it's a currency that is only getting more and more valuable and appreciating day by day. So I think it's data. That's where the technology and the thinking and the work is headed with massive upside. The other one, and it goes to a point that a number of the team have already made about integration, but I think it's actually about lawyers taking, and I think Evan mentioned it too, but kind of building more sophisticated developer mindsets and around things like building microservices. So legal microservices, including what we call headless applications. So there's a limit to how much you can ask someone to come to your questionnaire and your system to answer your questions about the specific thing you want them to do or they need to do there. Instead saying, can we build an application or a solution as a service that can receive information and data from another system and send back, in the background, a contract that's been drafted to precisely what's required, or a bit of advice or an outcome or an approval, without them having to go through a browser-based runtime experience. So lawyers are becoming more sophisticated developers, year on year, and they'll build these headless service task-based applications over time so that, they're not asking IT for things anymore. They're actually building and delivering things to IT and the rest of the business that talk to systems inherently. So that's what is, I think we're very excited about where we're headed.
And the exciting part about how that's combining in law firms now, how we're seeing more and more internal specialists that can do the sort of things that you're doing, or in-house, or folks such as all of yourselves providing those as additional revenue streams, looking at a client's business much more holistically and looking at solutions that speak to all of the bits and pieces, not just narrowly to legal advice. It's again going to be an absolutely fascinating space. So Giles, we're over to you for last thoughts on where it's all going. You're going to close us out, so no pressure, but, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thanks very much. I agree with all that's been said, and actually I'm quite pleased, particularly the data points being covered, because it's a hard one to handle, but it's hard to make as exciting as the idea of no code, but I do think it's really, really important, especially when you're talking about, for example, contract negotiations and that kind of thing. But it's been said. I think I'm going to go with the boring one, a very immediate term one, and then one that's a little bit sexier just to keep people interested. The first one I would say is the shift from cloud software as opposed to on-premise software. It's effectively it's like the shift to sort of email versus sort of installing stuff on floppy disks and CD-ROMs. It's staggering to me that this hasn't happened already, but the pandemic has shown people that actually having slightly more robust tools that lend themselves to remote working, that are just as secure, but are more agile and just easier to configure, especially when everybody's sort of spread around the world. It's a good thing for everyone. The other thing, and I think that the key thing for people looking at this and potentially looking at products, is it makes things cheaper for you as well, and you're going to have more up-to-date software more frequently. So in terms of concrete things, I can say with a high degree of certainty, I've seen a huge shift in mindset when it comes to buying legal automation software. So if your organization hasn't changed, you're falling behind. Bit of what's going on there. And then the sort of immediate term thing, I think, is bringing back boring, actually. So looking at quick wins. And we're in an environment, let's not forget here, where I was looking at the Solicitors Regulatory Authority in the UK. Less than 10% of law firms in the UK, and I imagine it's broadly similar in Australia, are have made available their contracts in an automated form on their website or on a specialized website. That is a tiny amount when you consider the way that most people consume the other online-based services in their life. So we've got, I think we're going to have a huge explosion in those types of tools, which are a bit like sort of Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom or something like that. That's going to be a new sort of facet to law firms. But I think that's going to be we're going to be bringing back boring. We're going to be doing basic documents on there, and we're going to be able to utilize Nocode to do that. And so those people who sort of skip that coded phase of automation will be sort of catching up using those tools. That being said, I actually think that I wonder whether Nocode will be the primary modus operandi for launching these projects in 10, 15 years' time. Now, I actually think that what it's going to be is it's actually going to be the tool that people use to tweak automatically configured automation. So in maybe 10, 15 years, there will be recommendation engines that you give some instructions to. They create your automation. Then you're using Nocode as a way of tweaking what a computer is prepared for you. Now, what am I talking about? So Avoca specifically, we are looking at something which is addressing that sort of use case in 10, 15 years. But we're hoping to bring it to market quite a bit sooner. What we're doing is we're actually working with Lawtech UK, which is an initiative between the UK Ministry of Justice, the Lawtech Delivery Panel, and Tech Nation, which are all sort of big institutions out in the UK. And what we're doing is we're actually building a machine learning sort of element to our platform at the moment, where you can take a legal document or a contract, put it through the sequence of code, and what that will do is that will automatically set up automation. So at this stage, it's very, very experimental, but we're sort of looking one step beyond that Nocode. And I actually think Nocode will stay there, but it will be, after that recommendation has sort of suggested how to configure the Nocode automation for that particular automation use case. So that's sort of my more blue sky thinking approach as well to that question.
Fantastic. And so much to look forward to, which is always a good way to end any session, I think. I wanted to thank you, Sam, Giles, Jean, Mark, and Evan, not just for today, but again to thank you and Avoca and Joseph and Lawhawk and Neota Logic and Checkbox for being absolutely amazing collaboration partners. Folks, this has been a unique global collaboration between folks who might otherwise be considered to be competitors. And I think that the fact that they've come together for this, for you, is a testament to the amazingness of their organisations, but also their willingness to support knowledge and information in this so that you can make great purchasing decisions, I hope, from each and every one of them. So I wanted to, again, extend the thanks of the Centre to all of you, to thank you for being great friends of the Centre, and particularly on this series for delivering something that I have no doubt will make a significant contribution to our legal ecosystem. Thank you very much, folks. Really appreciate it.
Wouldn't have happened without you, Terri.
Thanks,
you say
Mark.
come together, but it takes someone to actually make these things happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you everyone who have attended this session. Don't forget, it's one of 7, so please do go back and revisit the series, and we hope you revisit it often. Thanks very much, folks. So until next time, thanks and goodbye.
Terri.
Thank you.
See you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.